Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the October 2021 meeting of the Brookhaven National Laboratory Community Advisory Council. I'm Reed Hodgen, and I'll be your facilitator this evening. I'd like to note that this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will serve as part of the formal record for the meeting. I'd like to also ask that everyone right now mute themselves and stay muted unless you're deliberately speaking during the meeting. I'm joined this evening by Robin McKay and Sal Gonzalez, stakeholders in community relations. Because of the continuing COVID-19 situation,
just give me a second.
Okay, we'll be conducting tonight's meeting online using the Zoom virtual meeting application. If you need technical assistance in participating at any time, please email or call Robin as you see on your screen right now. If you're participating by phone only tonight, please email Robin and let her know what name goes with the phone number you're using. We can only see the phone number at our end, and we'd like to give you credit for attending. So you can just respond to one of your emails from Robin that you received previously if you wish. So let me go over the ground rules for a second. They're the ground rules that I'll go through a few key points very quickly for you. This is a protected place where everyone who follows the rules of the CAC are honored, respected, and listened to. Our foundation, in fact, is respect and tolerance for each other, our values, our interests, and integrity. We want to hear all ideas, opinions, questions, and thoughts that are voiced with respect. All input is worthy of CAC consideration. We want to make sure that each one of you gets the opportunity to participate in discussions and deliberations. Expressing your feelings and opinions is encouraged. In fact, if you don't feel you're being allowed to do that effectively, that's my fault. And if that happens, please call me on it and I'll correct it. We want to seek to hear and understand the interests of all of you and work to make sure that your core interests are met in our deliberations tonight. Conflict is okay. We have a number of interests around the table and we expect to see conflict. It's part of our process. But as always, personal attacks will be avoided at all times. We have an agenda this evening. I'll be going over that in a minute. We're going to adhere to it. If you want to talk about a different topic, then we'll find the right time to do that and continue on with our agenda. In fact, issues that are not on the agenda will be deferred and we'll find the right time. We want to have all of the members of the CAC represented in our face-to-face meetings. We want just the primary to talk, but tonight, because it's a virtual meeting, both the primary and alternates can interact as you wish to do. We want to keep our questions, comments, and discussion to the topic at hand. If you want to talk about something else, we'll do that at the right time. And as always, there'll be an opportunity for community comment this evening. So let's look at the agenda for a moment. This evening, we're going to start with an administrative session. And then we're going to move from there to have some environmental updates provided by Jason Remian. Our first presentation of the evening will occur with Bob Gordon, who's the Brookhaven site office manager, providing us a briefing on BNL's participation in LIPA's 2021 bulk energy storage RFP. We'll follow that with a science presentation by Dr. Kathy Kettler, who will be talking about expansion of isotope production at BNL. And then we're going to move to a special guest that we have this evening. We'll be joined by Conrad Sherman from EPA, with a presentation on BNL's National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollution application. That's the NESHAP program. And we really welcome Conrad to our meeting. That will be followed by our major environmental presentation of the evening. Jason will be back with us to talk about, to kick off our discussions about the 2020 site environmental report. Then we'll do agenda setting and community comment. As you can see, we have a number of presentations this evening. They are content rich, and they're going to take some time. So we expect to have about a 9-10 stoppage for the meeting this evening, a little longer than usual, but we hope that you'll stay with us. The presentations are really, really important. Okay, so let me now, if I may, like to toss it to David Manning, who'll get us started on our meeting tonight. David, over to you.
Thank you very much, Reed. This is it's very brief because we have a full meeting. Thank you. This is a very efficient way to meet. Zoom has worked well for us, but I, for one, look forward to the opportunity in the future when we can all be together again and have offhand conversations and socialize a bit. So I will now, in the interest of time, push it over to our lab director, Dr. Gibbs.
Thank you, David. Welcome, everybody. It's really a pleasure to see all of you again, even if it's a virtual meeting. Thank you very much for coming. These are important meetings, and we take a lot from the comments that you give us. Just a couple sentences about Brookhaven. Broadly speaking, we're continuing as we were the last time we spoke to you. The mission continues. We're still at about a third of the total staff coming on site each day, between 900 and 1,000 people again so far. Not much new on the budget beyond what you read in the newspapers. And we're in the process of implementing the vaccination requirement that was given in the executive order by President Biden. Beyond that, welcome again. Good to see you all. And I'm very much looking forward to the talks tonight.
Thanks very much, Dune. Appreciate that. Now we're going to move into our administrative session for the evening. We have some membership activities to do for just a second. I'd like to note that Enrico Nardone, who's with the CTUC Environmental Association, is participating with us this evening for the second time. Thank you very much for doing that. As you folks know, Enrico is considering applying for membership in the CAC, and he's doing his checkout meetings as we speak. And he met with us in September, and he's back again this month. I'd also like to welcome to this evening's meeting John Pavacek, who's with Forest, the Foundation for Research and Stewardship in the Long Island Pine Barrens Maritime Reserve. He's participating this evening for the first time, and he's going to be looking at us to see if he wants to be a member as well. And I'd like to take just a moment, if I could, and invite John to introduce himself to the CAC as he begins his participation. John?
Thank you very much, Reed. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, thanks. Thank you again for welcoming me to the CAC. Just by way of background, I spent just over 35 years in the public environmental protection, land use planning field, first with the Town of Brookhaven Division of Environmental Protection, then the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. After that, I did a brief stint by several years at the Suffolk County Department of Parks. And my last position was as executive director with the Central Pine Barrens Joint Planning and Policy Commission, from which I retired at the end of this past January. And since then, I've been pursuing some other matters, but which have included becoming executive director of Forest, which is the successor to FERN, which some of you folks might have heard of, the Foundation for Ecological Research in the Northeast. And so we are looking to do some significant work in regard to stewardship and environmental protection and research in not only the Central Pine Barrens, but also the Greater Long Island Pine Barrens Maritime Reserve, which essentially includes all of Long Island, basically east of the Patchogue Mount Sinai Road. And we also look to do collaboration with other environmental organizations and other Pine Barrens areas and similar habitats in the Northeast. So thank you again for welcoming me and for allowing me to participate tonight.
Thank you very much. Well, we hope that you'll enjoy this and get a lot of benefit from it, as we know we will get benefit from you. So we'll continue on. Another membership note, if I could, we've identified 5 members of the CAC that have not met attendance requirements over the past 12 months. So we're going to be sending them a letter encouraging them to attend the next meeting. And if they're not able to do that, then we'll probably be taking membership action associated with them. So I'd like to move on now, if I could, to the notes and action items from our September meeting. If you'd pull those out, I would appreciate it. And we can have a look at those together. Okay. Can you folks see the draft notes from the September meeting on the screen? That work?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. I now like to entertain any additions, deletions, or corrections to the September 2021 notes. And I'm not able to, Robin, if you could do me a favor and acknowledge anybody who needs that. I'm not able to see my participants list at the moment.
I don't see any hands up, Reed.
Right, and I've got it now. Okay, very good. Then in this case, I would like to invite I'll do a poll, and we will get our, we'll get this taken care of. Hold on just a second. Okay. So now we're going to take a vote. We'd like you to participate in this poll. The question is, are you in favor of approving the September 2021 action items and notes with no amendments? So thank you. All righty, I show that we have 17 members approving and 5 abstentions. So the action items and notes from the September meeting are approved with 17 yays, no nos, and 5 abstentions. Thank you very much. All right, now we have a moment. If there are any members of the CAC that would like to share anything during administrative time, now's the time to raise your virtual hand and we can get you on. Anybody want to share something with the CAC? All right, very good. Thank you. Then next we're going to move to the presentation portion of our evening. And we're going to start out this evening with environmental updates from Jason Remian. Jason, may I turn it over to you for our environmental updates?
Yes, you may. Good evening, everybody. So tonight, because we have such a packed agenda, I agreed to kind of give a quick environmental update. Sorry, we don't have any slides or pictures to show, but as you know, over the last several months, we've been providing you updates on 2 very important projects, the stack demolition project and also the building 650 demolition project. And both of those projects are really at the same stage where field activities are essentially done up at the stack. You know, all of the equipment, everything's been demobilized. Restoration has been completed at both locations, and I promise we will show you some pictures up on the stack. All the topsoil has been placed and seeded, and you would never even know a stack existed there. So we will share that with you. But right now, for both projects, they're waiting for some sample results to come in, some final sample results that were collected of the excavation and cleanup areas, and working on the closeout reports. So I assure you, we will get you better and some more updates as we go forward, but we just wanted to give you a quick update as to where those 2 important projects were. So if anybody has any questions, I can answer them. And we also have some representatives from the contractor for the stack project online as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. So if you have a question or a comment for Jason, please raise your virtual hand and we will acknowledge you. Okay, if you have one and you haven't been able to raise your virtual hand, just go ahead and pop in.
Yeah, sorry, Reed, I'm trying to find my virtual hand on my computer, but I can't
That
find
works.
it.
That works.
Good evening, everybody. First, if I could take a moment to welcome John Pavisak to the group. I had the honor and pleasure of working with John for over 10 years in the Central Pine Barrens Commission, and I can tell you that not only is he a gentleman, he was a wonderful and valuable resource with the commission. So, John, welcome aboard. I hope I didn't embarrass you too much. Regarding my question, and this was a follow-up to the question I'd asked last month concerning the stack. Do the other monitoring agencies, that is the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and/or the Suffolk County Department of Health, independently sample the area where the stack was with respect to after work activities at that site?
So I'll start off and somebody else can chime in if necessary. But the answer to that question is yes, they have. The state has done that in the past. For the stack, though, however, they didn't. But this project does have a separate third party. They're called ORISE, and I don't know what that stands for, but they do come in and they do sampling. This is through DOE, sampling of the soils and surveys, and they confirm and review all of the closeout report and the results. So there is an external body of people who do collect samples on their own and confirm that the cleanup goals are met. And please, somebody jump in and correct me if I'm wrong or if I said something incorrectly. But that's I'll start things off with that response.
No, thank you, Jason. This is Dan Hours. I'm trying to. There we go. Good evening, everyone. No, I think you're spot on with that, Jason. It's the Oak Ridge Institute of Science and Engineering, I believe.
Science and education.
Education. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
So yes, they are an independent agency attached to DOE, and they basically, I guess you could say, shadowed us. I'm with OFJV, the contractor who did the demolition, and then the post sampling. And ORISE was on site during our sampling efforts, and they pretty much replicated what we did. And they're running their analyses and their evaluations independently of our own. And their results will be reported along with ours in the closeout report that is in preparation right now. All of the laboratory analysis is not yet complete. Both ours and ORISE's are, they're both still in progress. But those results should be in the next week or so. And yes, their results will be reported alongside of ours in the final report, so everyone can see how they compare.
And can I ask, as a follow-up, will those reports be available to this committee for review?
Yes, I'm making sure I'm not on mute. We had discussed this, I think, I don't know how many meetings ago, but we agreed to make available to the CAC the final closeout report for the project so that you will have an opportunity to see that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Daniel.
I just want to chime in also for Daniel. In the past, also, there's been multiple incidences of the county health department splitting samples with BNL for groundwater samples, surface water samples in the Peconic River, even soil sediment in the Peconic River. So it's not, I don't want you to think it's a practice that hasn't occurred. A lot of it did occur in the past, and now currently they're using this this third party validator or verifier, however you wanted to describe it. So I just wanted to throw that out there for the context and the history.
Yes, thank you, Adrian. And I'll just again, we've mentioned this, and we have been providing EPA, the state, and the county updates on both of these projects every month, at least during the IAG calls. And representatives have been given the opportunity. They have come on site to observe operations and inspect. However, and they were more than welcome to collect samples if they wanted to, and they have in the past. They just they didn't ask to do that or request to do that for this particular project. So as Adrian said, this is something that we do quite often, working with the regulators, you know, to make sure that, you know, if they want to collect samples, they're more than welcome to do that.
Do we have any additional questions or comments for Jason? All right, thank you, Jason, very much. We'll look forward to next month's environmental updates as well. Now we're going to start into the formal presentations for our evening. And I'd like to make a facilitator's note as we do this. Because of the depth of content that exists in these presentations, what I'd like to ask you to do is to hold your comments and questions of substance until we get to the end of the presentations. As usual, if you have a question of clarification, what does this unit mean? What does this acronym mean? That sort of thing. Go ahead and raise your hand and we'll get you. But otherwise, at the end of the presentation, you know, I'll invite everyone to come in with their questions, and that's the time to raise your virtual hands, and we'll go to questions of substance at that point. So thank you. I'd now like to start into our first presentation of the evening. We're joined this evening by Bob Gordon, who's the Department of Energy Brookhaven Site Office Manager. Bob is joining this evening to talk about BNL's participation in LIPA's 2021 Bulk Energy Storage RFP. And Bob, I'd like to turn it over to you now for this presentation.
Thanks, Reed. And good evening, CAC members. It's been a while since a DOE representative has had the privilege of addressing you. We should probably do it a little bit more often. And I see that there's some new members here. So maybe next time I can walk you through who DOE is and specifically who the DOE site office is. But I'll leave that for another time. What I'd like to talk to you about tonight is what's happening or possibly happening with Brookhaven Lab in energy storage. Now, last month, we all heard from Esther Takeuchi and Amy Marshall about the exciting advances that Brookhaven is contributing to battery storage research. That's a great segue to discuss some possible big plans for the laboratory to play a more active role in the national and local energy storage arena. You may or may not be aware that LIPA has put out a solicitation for proposals for large utility scale energy storage. They're looking for projects that propose a minimum of, say, 20 megawatts. So proposals were due from developers by July 30th, and LIPA's schedule for proposal selection is currently scheduled for January, so January 22. While BNL didn't submit a proposal, we're aware of at least one respondent who did, and their proposal suggests a partnership with BNL as a host to the developer's equipment. We wanted you to know that a large-scale energy storage project is consistent with the Department of Energy's objectives, and we're supportive of LIPA's efforts to make advances in renewable energy. So, but we don't have a role in LIPA's decision process. That is strictly up to them on what they do and the proposals that they choose. We don't know how many proposals have been submitted. We know, as I said, of one that is suggesting Brookhaven. There could be more. We just don't know. So we'll all wait till January to find out what the results of their selection process looks like. So if LIPA looks upon BNL's involved proposal favorably, we know from past experience with the Long Island Solar Farm that the process and the conditions for such a collaboration, it takes a lot of time and effort. So similar to the solar farm, we would provide the CAC with updates on the progress. I don't know the specifics about the proposal that was submitted, only that the one that was submitted named Brookhaven as a host site. What I do know is that similar to the Long Island Solar Farm RFP, we posted a notice in response to the LIPA RFP that stated our intent to participate under certain conditions. So we've posted that letter of intent on BNL's website. It's on the Partnering with BNL part of the website. And so what you're seeing on the screen is a link to that website. And we did that purposely is that, as I said, we are not part of LIPA's selection process. We were not part of the selection process for the Long Island Solar Farm. We're the recipient of when they go through their process of how they select an offeror. We then get to work with that offeror to come up with a deal. So if you glanced at the page as they scrolled through it quickly here, I'll just give you the salient points. Is that what we want from this deal is just like the solar farm, is that we were very happy to host it, but it has to have connectivity to the laboratory. I mean, certainly the objectives of the solar farm and the objectives of this energy storage facility are consistent, as I said, with the Department of Energy's objectives, but we want a compelling reason on why Brookhaven connected to its mission. So what we're asking for and what we told in our letter of intent is that an organization that is interested in hosting it with Brookhaven, the connectivity would be is that we can make certain acreage available up to about 4 acres. We figure it could be placed very closely to the Long Island Solar Farm. That we would do exactly what we did with the Long Island Solar Farm. We would enter into either an easement or a lease, whichever suits the need. We would want real-time access to the data that comes from the facility, just like we did for the Long Island Solar Farm. And we would want consideration. With the Long Island Solar Farm, Brookhaven got a dedicated 1 megawatt array for research purposes. We would expect the same kind of consideration from this effort in the form of potentially a 1 megawatt battery. So as I said, I don't suspect we'll hear anything until January if LIPA keeps to its schedule, but our intent is to keep you informed as we get informed about the process. So that's it in a nutshell for today.
Thank you very much, Bob. All right, the floor is open. If anyone has any questions or comments, please raise your virtual hand and we will get you taken care of.
Can I raise my real hand?
Please do.
Okay.
Go for it.
I just want to chime in again. Apparently I'm doing that tonight. The proposer of this project did reach out to Citizens Campaign. We reviewed it and we actually like this project. Just so folks know, it would be constructed on land that's already cleared. It would be near a substation that could accept the power. So that makes it a reasonable option. It would be right next to the existing solar farm. So battery backup next to a solar farm makes total sense, and it makes solar way more efficient. And, you know, increases obviously the value of that renewable energy generation. So we had a number of the different respondents who are responding to this request for proposal. But we like this one and one other one. The other ones were less desirable. So I'm just putting my 2 cents in to say there was some very positives associated with this battery backup storage.
Thank you.
So let me comment on that from the Department of Energy perspective. Thank you, Adrian, for that. I think that's excellent that you folks are involved. From the Department of Energy perspective and the LIPA perspective, it is an ongoing RFP of which we cannot intercede in the award process. So for fairness of opportunity, we have not gotten into discussions with proposals about with the proposers. We've only made our intent on where to place it and what the conditions would be. So I'm very glad that folks have reached out to you, but we cannot because it's an ongoing solicitation process. So thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Adrian. Would anyone else like to make comment or ask questions of Mr. Gordon? Okay, thank you, Bob, very much for appreciate it. And would love to have updates. Go ahead, please.
I'm sorry. Hi, it's Mark Israel. I just had a question. I'm not sure if Bob is the right recipient. How are you, Bob?
Good.
Based on economies of scale, if we're included by chance in 3 or 4 proposals, is there a way that we can build an even more massive energy storage facility that could satisfy multiple proposals?
So that's something that we would have to see what the result of the LIPA solicitation is. I don't know, just like with the solar farm, we did not get involved in the process. They selected the developers. It was then up to them to discuss with us the possibilities of what the footprint would be and what the capabilities would be and the connectivity would be. So that'll all occur during the selection process, but don't know is the answer, and we'll see what LIPA actually comes up with when they make their selection. It could be, remember, even with the solar farm process, if you remember, was that there were multiple awards made, and the decision about how the multiple awards were made was really at the determination of LIPA on spreading, I guess, the award to others to not put it all in one place. So I would suspect that's going to happen here as well.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you again, Bob, very much. And we will look forward to hearing updates on this if you would care to bring them to us. And a note to the members of the CAC, to the extent that you can, use your virtual hand to let us know that you want to come in with a question. That'll just make it easier to manage the process as we go forward. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
We're now going to move to the next presentation on our agenda this evening. We're joined tonight by Dr. Kathy Cutler, who's the director of the Medical Isotope Research and Production Program at the Collider Accelerator Department. And she's going to talk about expansion of isotope production. I'd like to introduce Bob Tribble this evening, who's going to kind of kick this off for us. Bob, I turn it to you.
Thank you, Reed. So it's a pleasure for me to be able to introduce Dr. Cutler. As you just said, she is the director of the Brookhaven's Medical Isotope Research Production and Development Group, what we call MERP. The MERP group operates the LINAC isotope producer, or BLIP. I'm using up all her acronyms, as you might see. And BLIP produces radioisotopes for commercial production, as well as produces isotopes for research activities that are being carried out. She is currently involved in evaluating the accelerator production of a particularly interesting isotope, actinium-225, that I believe she'll tell you about. Also, she directs the Radiopharmaceutical Research and Production Labs, or RRPL, and that lab produces targets from the BLIP activity that is produced by the LINAC. Kathy's research over the years has focused on developing production and separation methods for high specific activity radioisotopes, thereby creating a suite of diagnostic and therapeutic agents tailored for individual needs. Her work has been funded by the DOE, the NIH, the NSF, and some public foundations. We're really fortunate to have Kathy. She brings more than 28 years of experience in the development and evaluation of radiopharmaceuticals, utilizing bioinorganic and radioanalytical chemistry to develop and evaluate radiopharmaceuticals for both diagnosis and therapy. So Kathy, I'll turn it over to you, and you can let the folks know what you're doing in the production of actinium-225 and perhaps some others.
Sorry, I was talking very loudly to myself, but of course you couldn't hear me. So you have to push those buttons sometimes. So thank you for that kind invitation, Dr. Tribble. So I'm really kind of excited to talk to you today about something that the Department of Energy has been working on for a very long time and trying to really increase the amounts of actinium-225 and get it out so that we can actually help support clinical trials for this really important isotope. You will see throughout my talk that as a chemist, I abbreviate my elements as a chemist, so hopefully you'll be okay with that. If you're not familiar with actinium, there's that thing called a periodic table, and at the very bottom there are those two rows, and actinium is the first element in that row. It's not always that very interesting chemically, but nuclear wise, it has a lot of really good properties for use in really nuclear medicine, which is our interest. So the Department of Energy has really had a long history in developing isotopes that could be used as well as developing the applications. And that has really led to the development of many of the key isotopes that are used for medical applications. And really without the development of those isotopes and in many of the methods for using them, I'm not sure that we'd really have what we call nuclear medicine today. And here's just listed some of the really key isotopes that have been developed. Many of these are used for imaging and therapy. What you can see on here is Brookhaven actually developed what's called the Molly-Tech generator. And this was really important because it allowed the ability to ship a generator to hospitals so that they actually have the isotope on site. And this has really been used, it's used in about 85% of all nuclear medicine diagnostic images. And it was based on technology that was really developed here at Brookhaven. Another big advance at Brookhaven was the scientist here got involved. There was a physician who was interested in labeling glucose. And what he understood is that by labeling glucose, you would be able to image metabolic changes in the body that would enable you to diagnose disease and abnormalities. So there were physicians or physicists and chemists here who got involved in labeling glucose with fluorine 18 and actually sent out the first sample that was actually utilized in humans at UPenn. One of the ones I'm going to talk about here is actinium-225. And it's of interest because actinium is an alpha emitter, which can be used for therapy. And by producing it, we actually end up getting two isotopes out of it, the actinium and its daughter, bismuth-213. So the isotope, in case you're not familiar with the mission of the program, is to produce both stable and radioactive isotopes. We do not compete with the commercial sector. And we're here to make isotopes that they aren't able to make or aren't able to make in sufficient supply to really support the applications that they're developed upon. We additionally maintain the infrastructure, and one of our aims under this is to look at what the future needs are and, as necessary, build the infrastructure to ensure that we can meet the nation's isotope needs. And one of the things I'm going to talk to you today is about some infrastructure we've developed to help support the actinium-225. Further, we do R&D and developing new isotopes that are of interest, and we kind of focus on the hard things that no one else can do, which can be a little daunting at first, but with the teams that we have at DOE, we find that we can be successful and then get it to the point that we can eventually hand it off. And then finally, we're very interested in workforce development. There's a lot of need for new talent in this area, and we don't have enough. So we often have faculty and students who come and utilize our facilities to do research that they can't do at our home institutions. As Dr. Tribble mentioned, we're part of the overall Collider Accelerator Department, and they run a number of accelerators, and the one they're most known for is running the relativistic heavy ion collider. And they have a linear accelerator that they use to deliver polarized protons to the RIC to do their nuclear physics studies. And what they found was that they had some excess capacity. So back in the 70s, they actually built what's called the BLIP, which is the Brookhaven-Linac isotope producer. And it was built to basically accept the protons, enabling us to irradiate targets to produce isotopes using these high energy protons to do that. Once the targets finish their irradiation, they then go over to building 801, which houses our laboratories, which contain hot cells that we utilize for processing these targets, isolating the isotopes, and then characterizing them and sending them out for use in hospitals and other applications, or doing some of our own internal research. So really one of the keys to our program is the BLIP, the Brookhaven Linac isotope producer, which came online in 1972. And the Linac is very unique in that it can deliver protons to the BLIP from 66 MeV up to 200 MeV, and it can deliver it pulse by pulse to different facilities. So this allows us to run our facility in concert with the RIC and the NSRL. Now we say that it's a synergistic operation, but the reality is we get something like 85 to 95% of all the pulses come to the BLIP. Now the way that the BLIP works is we actually have a hot cell, which you can see here, which is basically a big shielded box with remote hands. And if you look at the schematic, the hot cell actually sits above about a 30-foot shaft. And this shaft is filled with water, which we actually use for cooling the targets and for shielding. We actually insert the targets down into the shaft. The proton beam comes in and we irradiate the targets, and the water is actually flowing across those targets. And we can irradiate these targets anywhere from short periods of time, such as minutes, to up to some targets we irradiate up to 6 months. And so this allows us to produce very unique isotopes. Now we run what we call stacked targets. And so we have degraders and targets that we load into what we call baskets. And the beam enters in from the front and it degrades as it goes through the back. And this is designed to optimize the energy that goes in, because there's an optimal energy that needs to enter that target nucleus to produce the isotope of interest. So there's a lot that goes into design these to make sure that we get optimal production of the isotope we want and minimal production of any impurities. So there's a lot of people around the lab who work with us to really go through the calculations and the design of these targets to produce these isotopes. After the targets complete their irradiation, they are then transported over to building 801, which is shown here. So they come along this road and then they're transported up, and then we have a special cache that we use to introduce the targets into the building and then put them into the hot cells so that we can process them. So at building 801, this is kind of the layout for what we call the RRPL, which is the Radionuclide Research and Production Laboratory. We enter it from the second floor. You come in, and first what you see is a bunch of small laboratories. And these are really designed to allow us to do low-level radioactive research. So we start out here and looking at our new designs for isotopes that we want to make. As you go further back, what we have is what we call hot cells and hot boxes. So these are shielded enclosures that we utilize to process these targets. And part of why we're here today is we're looking at bringing up a new hot cell, which we call the all-inclusive production hot cells, which we're going to be utilizing for making actinium-225. So we bring the targets in, and then we load them into the hot cell, and then we process them. Now, a focus of our group is really trying to help advance what they call precision medicine. And so we're interested in making isotopes that can be used in theranostics. And what theranostics are is a combination in which we're using a diagnostic tool in which we can image the patient, kind of understand their disease, and then inform on what the proper therapeutic tool is that we need. This is an old concept that has been done in nuclear medicine for quite some time. Probably one of the first was actually with iodine-131, which has been used for decades for treating thyroid cancer. It's been advanced since then, in which what we're doing is using it for what we call personalized medicine. So we give the diagnostic, and then based on the images, we learn a lot about this person's disease, and it allows us to optimize what the right drug is to treat that patient, what the dose is, and at what time we should give it so that we can optimize the treatment for those patients. Now, what we are making are really the isotopes, and the isotopes get attached to molecules. And these molecules are often uptaken very quickly, for instance, by cancer cells. So cancer cells tend to increase certain metabolic pathways, and we can target those. And by targeting it, we can image it, but we can also deliver the radioisotope there to actually ablate those cells. And the advantage of using radioisotopes is that we can give very small amounts to do both the imaging and therapy, and they decay away, and they decay away to small amounts that aren't going to have any toxic side effects. So they can be very effective in treating patients who have metastatic cancer, for instance. So we're trying to design the isotopes to help in these targeted applications. Now, when we're talking about therapy, we utilize isotopes that decay, giving off what we call particle emitters. And these are either beta emitters, so they decay giving off electrons, or they're alpha emitters and they decay giving off basically the helium nucleus, which is quite large. There are pluses and minuses to both of these. Now, for beta emitters, one of the challenges that we've seen as we got into this is if you look at this schematic of cells here, these large purple cells with the little blue on the outlining are meant to represent tumor cells. And this little Y here is a molecule that is targeting those tumor cells, and it's carrying a radioactive payload. And so the one to your left shows a payload that has a beta emitter. And so when it decays, that electron comes out and it follows along this line, and it ends up depositing most of its energy right here. And the challenge is this is now in the normal tissue. And so with beta particles, the challenge is due to this long path length can result in toxicity to the normal tissue. Here is actually shown an alpha particle. Again, we've attached it to this targeting molecule. It's targeted the tumor cell. And you can see that this arrow is much bigger, and that's to show that it's delivering a much higher dose. But you also can see it's traveling much shorter, which means all that dose is staying in the tumor cell. So the advantage of this alpha particle is I can use much lower amounts of this targeting agent, I can get much higher doses, and I can significantly decrease the toxicity to normal tissues. And so this is why people are so interested in these. The challenge gets to be is that, for instance, for actinium-225, the material that we have that's producing this is actually comes from material that was produced like back in the 50s and the 60s from breeder reactors, and there's a very small amount of it. And so we only have about 1.7 curies worldwide, and this is really not enough material to support clinical trials. And all this material now is actually spoken for. So we were looking at methods that we could actually increase the amount of actinium-225 so that we could support clinical trials. And so in looking at this, there is actually a high energy accelerator route that you can utilize to produce this material in the quantities that would help support these clinical trials. So based on this, the Department of Energy formed what they called the Tri-Lab effort. And it brought together Los Alamos and Brookhaven, both of which have high energy accelerators. And we have actually worked together before in producing isotopes in a way that we can make them available year round as needed by patients when they need these for medical diagnosis or treatment. Oak Ridge has had significant experience in actinium-225, particularly in the processing. So these three labs were brought together to evaluate and look at using these high energy accelerators to irradiate targets, which we're currently sending to Oak Ridge to extract the actinium-225 and send it out. Now, the actinium has a really short half-life, so having to ship this material to Oak Ridge really limits the amount that we can actually put in out there for people to use. So what we've been looking towards doing is actually doing processing here at Brookhaven National Laboratory. And at the building 801, there was a hot cell that was there that hadn't been used for some time, but had the right layout, the shielding, and would allow us to use similar systems that what we used at the building 801, but to process the actinium-225. So we've been looking at evaluating this and bringing and refurbishing this hot cell so that we could actually process the actinium-225 here. And part of this has resulted because of this new source we're bringing into 801, the NESHAPS permit that went to the EPA that will allow us to do this. Now, this just kind of shows you why. Why are we interested in doing this? And this is a patient who has metastatic prostate cancer. And this is an image shown in A, and this is actually done with an imaging diagnostic isotope that actually was developed at the Department of Energy. And what all these black spots that you see here are tumor load in this patient. And so what this image told the physician is that the drug is taken up there. And so this patient was loaded into enrolled in a clinical trial in which they were looking at a beta emitter called lutetium-177. And so they gave this patient 2 doses of this lutetium-177, and then they took this image that you see under B. And so what you can see here is that the tumor load in this patient has increased from when this patient first was imaged, showing that this treatment is not working. And you can further see that in the biomarker at the bottom where the PSA value has gone from 294 up to 419. So the physician decided to switch this patient over to actinium-225. And so they gave the patient 2 doses. They took another image as you see in C, and what you can see is the dramatic response that this patient is having to this treatment. Showing that the tumor is responding to the actinium-225. You can further see at the bottom that the PSA value is dropped to 3.5. So they gave them 1 more treatment, took another image shown in D. You can see the patient is continuing to have a successful response, and the PSA is dropped down to 0.1. So the point is that currently there's only enough of this material to support a few of these patients. And what we're hoping to do by bringing up processing is to put enough material out there to really support the large clinical trials that are needed for these types of applications. And I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
All right. Well, I see that Al Krupski has a question, so let's take his first. Al, please go ahead and give us your question.
Thank you, Reed. The question is on that last slide with the prostate cancer. What was the timeline for the treatment? What was the time between the treatments?
So the treatments were normally about 3 to 6 weeks apart between when they gave it and when they actually did the images.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Reed.
Yep, thanks, Al, very much. Okay, ready for any other questions or comments that you may have? I don't see, yes, I do. Dan McCormick, please.
Thank you. Ms. Cutler, what do you see as the biggest challenge now going forward regarding that supply issue?
So this is, so there's been a lot of interest in this for a very long time. And the challenge is that trying to make actinium is not a trivial process. So you have to have these high energy accelerators. The target tree itself is not trivial. We have to use a thorium target, and we have to design the target such that we can do the irradiations and then be able to do the chemistry afterwards. The chemistry, because it turns out that this is, when we do this irradiation, the challenge with this is that we don't just hit the target and voila, we convert everything over to actinium-225. It turns out we hit the target and we make a whole lot of stuff, and then we need to extract that actinium out. And so that's what the processing comes in, and we've been able to develop that process to get it up in there. I think the challenge is I'm not sure that it's always appreciated that it really takes these DOE teams to come together to make these things happen. And it will take the team to really make the supply available by continuing to have these labs work on these types of efforts.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Do we have any other comments or questions at this point? I don't see any hands, so if you need to, just go ahead and chime in. All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just have a question. Is this commercially available? You know, are you, is the science behind this already in production, or is this experimental?
So we are irradiating targets that we send to Oak Ridge, and they're processing and supplying this material.
And
So-
it's in hospitals right now, or is it, do hospitals have to request it?
So the actinium itself has to be incorporated into a drug before it ends up at a hospital. So there are other groups who are looking at developing those drugs. And so then they order the actinium, put the actinium into the drug, and then supply it to the hospitals to use.
Okay, thank you.
Can I chime in just a moment?
Sure.
The accelerators that are needed for this aren't out in the commercial enterprise these days. Brookhaven is one of the few places that has both the energy and the power in terms of how much beam it produces to be able to make a reasonable amount of this isotope. So from that perspective, right now, with the techniques that are available, it's not commercially available certainly by accelerator production, nor from milking from any heavier nuclides that I'm aware of.
Thanks, Bob, very much. We have a question or a comment now from Dave Spritzen. Dave?
Myself, okay. Number one is, what's the half-life of the actinium? Two, how toxic is it, and how do you deal with the safety elements involved in processing it?
Okay, so I'll start first. The half-life is 9.92 days. And so the actinium itself is not directly given. So what happens is we attach it to a molecule to take it to the sites that we want it to decay and then cause the destruction. And so you develop that molecule, and then we look at that for actually delivering the treatment. The process itself, we've been working on for quite some time. And we've been working with Oak Ridge, Brookhaven, and Los Alamos to look at developing the targets and then looking at how to do the separation and get the actinium-225 out. And so Oak Ridge is now has implemented that process and is doing it fairly routinely. We've been working with Oak Ridge, going there to learn what they're doing. and looking at how we can translate it here so that we can implement the process.
Is there one molecule that you're trying to use, or there are a range of molecules for different purposes or target treatments? What might they be, for example? Can you say anything about that?
So if I understand your question, what you're asking are there different molecules that we're using to treat different cancers? Is that correct?
That you attach the actinium-225 to?
Yes. So the actinium-225, there's like the image that I showed you, the actinium is actually attached to a small molecule that targets a receptor that's overexpressed on prostate cancers. But it's also been attached, for instance, to peptides that is used for also treating metastatic cancer. And it's also been attached to what are called monoclonal antibodies, which are large proteins. So there's a number of different molecules that the actinium has been attached to and is being evaluated for treating what is metastatic cancer in patients, which they really don't have many options.
David, does that take care of it?
It's beyond my level of expertise. I appreciate the answer very much. I thank you. And I struggle as always to understand the great work that you're doing at the lab. I thank you.
That's great. Thank you, David, very much. Are there any other questions or comments that we can take this evening? All right, come in if you need to. As I wrap this up, Dr. Cutler, thank you so very much for the time that you spent with us this evening. It's amazing how you've been able to take a very complex and technical subject and converse at a level that we can all work with. Much appreciated. We'd love to have you back in the future to talk about other programs that you're doing there in the Collider Accelerator Department, if that would be okay.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate the fact that I'm very lucky to get to do what I do. So I thank you all for your support, because without you, I would not be able to do this. So I feel very fortunate. So thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Very, very good. Very well done. And we will move on now in our evening. Next, we're going to have a presentation by a guest who's external to the laboratory. We're joined this evening by Conrad Sherman, who's a CHP environmental engineer in the health physics and the air and radiation division of the technology transport and radiation branch in the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Conrad is going to present to us this evening BNL's National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutions, the NESHAP program, and BNL's application. Good. So I'd like to once again hold our comments and questions of substance until the end of the presentation. And I'd like to turn it over now to Conrad to brief us on NESHAP. Conrad?
Okay, sound check. Sound check first of all. You guys hear
Sounds
me?
great, sir. All good.
Okay, so the first thing is I want to thank DOE and the lab for inviting me to speak, and the reason they invited me will become clearer as we go through the presentation. So EPA has a role to review, pursuant to Clean Air Act and the rules we promulgated, any DOE project where DOE estimates a certain level of potential emission of a hazard, well, of radionuclide. So that's where we are. Okay, next. So we work on other projects as a sibling federal agency with DOE. All of them are in the area of environmental compliance because that's our role. We work with the lab on several fronts. In particular, with NESHAP, we have several active applications for various radionuclide sources.
The last one we approved was in 2009 for the blip. Several others are active. The lab's required to monitor sample emissions as well as they monitor the environment, and they report this to us in an annual NESHAP report. They also produce the results of the environmental sampling in their annual environmental report, which we also have, access to for review. For this project, we're doing something a little different. Normally, we get the application, we review it, we approve it, and send it back to DOE. And unless somebody submits a FOIA request or otherwise wants to know what we're doing, the public doesn't know. So we've moved on. We're taking an openness position, and as part of that, we're partnering on engagement with local state agencies with the lab, and B&L kindly offered a chance for me to speak to the CAC, so that's what I'm doing. We're going to try to be open on this project to the extent that we can, coordinated with DOE on the development of the final application, but staying independent as an independent regulator, representing the public as a steward of the environment when the application is finally submitted and it comes to us for review and approval. Okay, next slide. So what we do right now is we're working with the lab and DOE iteratively so they have a complete application meeting our requirements. That's underway, and once it's done and we accept the application as complete, the standard gives us 60 days to review and approve the application or to deny it. In that case, DOE has appeal rights to us. We also plan to inform the state and local agencies of what we're doing and what our actions are. Some of the things that we review include appropriate air pollution controls. In the case of a nuclear facility, it's rather involved. It involves HEPA filters, the proper stack, ventilation controls, air sampling, and a few other details. We also look at the proposed operation, including how much material will be released or what they propose to release. We look at emergencies such as fires, explosions within the facility, or other accidents and what the release might be. One of the things we're doing, which is new for NESHAPs, is to look at environmental justice, which is a new EPA initiative you might have heard about. The standard requires the lab and DOE, as well as EPA, to look at the near site maximally exposed member of the public from the release. One of the other things we're also going to do is look at what the exposure is at the environmental justice impact areas, which are scattered around Suffolk County. There aren't, as far as we know right now, there aren't any tribal communities nearby, but we're going to review that a little further to make sure that they're engaged as well if necessary. Okay, next slide. So the NESHAP is an EPA rule. It was promulgated to address hazardous air pollutants, specifically subpart H, which applies to DOE facilities. The facility has to evaluate using our computer software model what the potential radiation dose is outside the facility at the boundary. And if it's above a certain number, 0.1 millirem, then they have to submit a complete application to us for our review and approval. One of the things we do, in addition to a technical review, is we do our own modeling and dose calculations. In addition, as we mentioned previously, they have to submit an annual report to the EPA, as well as what their projected offsite dose will be for the project. Okay, next slide. We don't do environmental monitoring, and we don't require environmental monitoring, but because the radioactive emissions are so low, they really can't be measured directly in the environmental monitoring. So we use some modeling in the environmental monitoring So we use a modeling approach to estimate the potential impact off-site. Okay. Next. Okay, so everybody go back one, please. Oh, go ahead. So these links will be available to you if you want to follow up on EPA, what EPA's role is. Okay, next. And if you want to contact me, email or phone, and have any questions, here's my information. Okay, thank you for allowing me to present.
Thank you very, very much, Conrad. So we will now take questions and comments for Mr. Sherman from EPA. So if you have any, please raise your virtual hand and we'll take them now. Okay, if anybody's having any trouble raising their virtual hand, just go ahead and chime in. All right, Conrad, we'd like to thank you very much for taking time out of your evening to join us tonight to tell us about the NESHAP program and how you're operating with that for BNL. We really appreciate it. We look forward to having you back and to having your interaction with the CAC as we go forward on topics that are of interest to the EPA. Any final words you'd like to share with us, Conrad, this evening?
I think I'll come back once the application is reviewed and approved and let you know status.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it very much. Okay, all right, well, we're going to move on now in our evening. And now we come to the point where we're going to talk about our 2020 site environmental report. This starts off a series of briefings that we'll have over the next several meetings. And we're joined this evening by Jason Rimian, who's manager of the Environmental Protection Division here at BNL. Jason is going to start off he's going to set the stage for us on the SER and then give us some detailed information. So Jason, I'd like to turn it over to you at this point. Once again, folks, we'll hold comments and questions of substance until later, and Jason may wish to stop periodically through the presentation at appropriate points and open it up for questions. Jason, if you want to do that, you're welcome to, or wait until the end. Jason, to you, sir.
Okay, so just microphone check. Can you hear me?
Beautiful.
Okay, and do you see the presentation?
See your starting slide right now.
Excellent. Very good. So thank you. And it looks like we're a little ahead of schedule, which is great because, as you know, for those of you who have been part of this group for years, I've actually presented this similar report every year, and there's a lot of information to get through. Stop me or remind me to take a breath occasionally, please. I do agree that if we could, we can hold off questions, of course, unless it's clarifying or you just can't wait and, raise your hand. Obviously, I can't see anybody raising their hand, so I'll depend on you, Reed, and others to chime in and let me know if somebody has a question, and I'd be more than happy to answer that. So,
cover Jason.
Let's see. Doesn't seem to be moving forward. I'll try it this way. Okay. So, every year we like to start off with the cover. So this is what the cover looks like this year. You'll notice quickly that it's not a photograph of a cute fox or, a majestic eagle. We did stay away from flora and fauna this year. We originally started talking about maybe showing, a great photograph of the Stack project, but in reality, that project that occurred in 2020 most of it occurred in 2021. So we, heads up for maybe what we might have for next year. Admittedly, though, this photograph was being sent around from one of the workers on the HFBR Stack D&D project that was actually on the top of the platform on the top of the stack. I think it was very early in January. So it was just at the start of the new year. And, when I saw it, I said, wow, that is really great. And I had suggested maybe we use it for the cover. And I really encourage everybody, as you know, we have a story on the inside of the cover to describe, the photograph and some other important topics about the report. When I looked at it, and the story inside will tell why we chose this, and kind of how it conveyed the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the laboratory operations as well as the environment. And I'll leave it up to you as to whether you agree or not, but this photo is looking towards the east or southeast. You can see the sun rising. It's a crisp, cool morning. And you can see it is early, but there's not a lot of people parked in the lots. And, it's just, that's how it looked a lot on site during COVID. And so again, I encourage you to look at it. Hopefully you agree. But one of the other things I wanted to remind myself when I looked at this slide is that one of the requirements that DOE had with the report in 2020 is to make sure that we discuss what the impacts of COVID-19 were to our environmental program. So you'll notice as I go through this presentation, I will be saying the words COVID-19 several times as far as what those impacts were to our program here at the site and operations. So this is a slide that I've shared year after year, and it's important though, because I want to remind everybody that this is a report that is actually required by the Department of Energy. It is an official record of BNL's environmental impact. It serves as a principal environmental communications vehicle. And I know myself personally, I refer to it quite often. It has a lot of great information, and you'll hear me remind you more often throughout the presentation to encourage folks to look at the details and the information that are included in the report. It does also showcase, admittedly, BNL's excellent as a leader in the reporting field. We have been recognized year after year as one of the better reports as far as summarizing the impacts to the environment on operations. So we're obviously very proud of that. This is another slide where to remind you that I will be speaking a lot of what happened in 2020. As you know, it is now October of 2021. It's just how this process works. We can't start writing the report until the end of the calendar year, and it takes a lot of time and effort to produce a document like this. So, however, as you know, we do meet often, and you can see several of the projects that are summarized in this report that we have provided updates to you. So, some of the information I'll share are things that but I also try to share a lot of things that maybe we don't usually talk about at the CAC on a normal basis. So the table of contents has not changed. The authors hasn't changed. You can see a photograph of a lot of the key authors for this report. I'll be sharing with you, giving you an overview of chapters 2 through 8. The only one I won't in that range is chapter 7. So next month, you will get a very detailed report from Bill Dorsch on groundwater. And that is essentially what you can see here. Actually, let me get my pointer working here. Is the groundwater status report. So volume 2, and that was approved by the regulators in September 2020. So let's get going. So chapter 2 is titled Environmental Management System, but there's a lot of topics that are discussed in that chapter, and I'll share some of those with you tonight. The first, which makes sense, is to talk about our EMS or ISO 14000 certification. This system remains fully integrated and effective at the laboratory, and this was based on an assessment that was done in 2020 by an external assessor, ERM CVS. And during that assessment, it did not identify any nonconformances and determined that the laboratory is in full conformance to the standard. We also have a section of chapter 2 that talks about our pollution prevention program, which I have shared with you over the years, and it is very mature. There are a lot of details and tables that provide a lot more detail than the bullets that I have here. But in general, in 2020, we were able to have a cost avoidance of over 1.7 million from some pollution prevention actions that have been taken, and also reduce, recycle, reuse 0.9 million pounds of industrial and sanitary and hazardous waste. Now, just in general, the 1.7, the bulk of that cost avoidance really comes from a very mature electronics reuse program. And that program actually became very useful during the initial times of COVID-19, when a lot of folks found themselves having to work from home, and they didn't have a laptop or they needed an extra monitor. And rather than going out and buying new, we tend to keep a lot of the old stuff, and we're able to reassign that so folks can use it. And the avoidance of having to buy new and use older systems to accommodate those requests has been very helpful. In the area of reducing and recycling, reusing, industrial sanitary hazardous waste, the bulk of that 0.9 million pounds still remains to be a combination of our metals recycling program, cardboard, paper, and also our electronics recycling program. So when we don't need the electronics anymore, we make sure that they are appropriately recycled with a vendor that is certified to do so. We're also very proud of our annual recycling rate. We're always looking to improve, but we have met the DOE goal year after year. In 2020, it was 63%. We're also proud of the awards that we have received. In 2020, we received a Green Electronics EPEAT Award, which really has a lot to do with our electronics program, not only on the purchasing side, where we buy certain products that meet certain gold standards, and because of the amount of those products that we purchase to support environmentally preferable purchasing, we have won the EPEAT Award for several years now. We've also won Green Buy Awards from DOE, and in 2020, a second Green Buy Prime Award, which is because we've met gold level 4 years in a row. And again, the importance about that is that DOE continuously raises the bar on the requirements year to year, and we try our best to try to meet those every year. So waste generation, as you know, our operations at the site here do produce waste, hazardous, mixed, and radioactive. Mixed waste is a combination of a waste stream that is both hazardous and radioactive. The bar graphs that you see on the right here are in the site environmental report, and they represent our routine waste disposal on site for actually these are from over the past 20 years, so you can see where we've been and where we are today. As far as hazardous waste is concerned, you can see in 2020 there was a slight reduction, and honestly that was really mainly due to COVID-19 related impacts on normal operations. We just weren't doing as much as we have in the past. As far as mixed waste generation, that increase is essentially due to shielding that was disposed of from accelerated facility beam lines. And I've mentioned to you in the past that the Collider Accelerated Department, some years, depending on a change in the program or upgrades to a certain area, will do an effort to remove some of this equipment that is ultimately a mixed waste. And that's why you kind of see the bars going up and down year to year. As far as radioactive waste generation, you can see that stayed pretty consistent compared to 2019. We also report on non-routine waste generation, which is like lab cleanouts and remediation efforts. And there are graphs in the SER, which you can look at. Now you can't compare, you don't have the numbers here to compare to last year, but the numbers for non-routine waste generation are lower than normal because we just didn't do as much of that work in 2020 due to COVID-19. However, we do try to do as much lab cleanings as possible to reduce the risks associated with legacy chemicals and so on in various labs throughout the site. You will see an increase in this next year when we report on the waste that was disposed of as part of the Building 650 project, which is considered non-routine. So I'm going to move on to environmental compliance, but I'm first going to take a drink of water. So there is a great deal of information in this chapter. And I'll start off by saying that, we must comply with a lot of permits, approximately 70 to be exact. Those include Title V and NESHAPs with both air, speedies, state pollutant discharge elimination system permit, tank storage, both above ground and underground storage, well permits, and RCRA for hazardous waste. And probably just as many, if not more, deliverables associated with those permits that we submit to various stakeholders and regulators to show that we are in compliance. As far as NEPA is concerned, we did review 114 additional projects in 2020. All of those projects were considered minor actions that required no additional documentation. One of them that you're familiar with started in 2020, but we didn't finish until 2021, and that was the environmental assessment for the electron ion collider. And as you know, we presented that project to you in 2021 as far as the status. On the potable water side of the house, our usage increased slightly in 2019, from 2019, 368 million gallons versus 357. We did report an action level exceedance on lead in the apartment area. And just so so that you understand what that means, EPA has a lead and copper rule, and as part of that lead and copper rule, BNL has to sample 20 locations around the site every 3 years. Now, those 20 locations are agreed upon with the New York State DOH and Suffolk County Department of Health Services. Now, when those tests were done in August of 2020, 3 unoccupied apartments had lead levels that were above the 15 part per billion action level that's defined by the rule. Now, as a result of COVID, most of the apartments and dormitories on site were empty for a very long time. And because of that, and this was months prior to the testing, and stagnant water in those pipes can lead to increased lead levels. And the rule is very specific and strict on how those samples are collected. And they want to capture the worst case scenario. And that is collecting what is called a first draw sample. We're not allowed to go ahead into these areas and flush the systems out prior to collecting the sample. So even at home, I always tell people, wherever you are in the world, you don't want to just turn the faucet on and fill your glass with water. But as far as this rule is concerned, we're supposed to do that to get a sample. And because of COVID and the fact that these apartments were not being used, we had these exceedances. Now, an action level exceedance doesn't mean we violated anything, but there are additional actions that we had to take, which included notifications and also additional samples being collected 6 months later, which we did, and they all were within limits. As you know, we also reported and presented to you our upgrades to some of our supply wells. Supply well number 11 had a granulated activated carbon filter upgrade for PFAS. That happened in 2020. And we also completed the upgrade of a GAC filter for supply well 10 in 2021. As far as tank compliance is concerned, we didn't have any inspections of the lab's petroleum and chemical bulk storage registration in 2020 due to COVID-19. However, we do continue to perform routine inspections and maintenance as part of the requirements and to make sure that these tanks are being operated, inspected, and maintained in accordance with the regulations. So also in chapter 3, we talk about our speedies compliance. And as you can see from the bar graph on the right, this is an area which we've had some challenges with regards to polytrizol. I'm getting some feedback. I don't know if it's on my side or maybe somebody else has their mic on. Is it just me?
You're sounding good to me. I'm going to look for other mics maybe on.
Okay, great. So in 2020, we had 10 permit excursions. 9 of them were at the sewage treatment plant and 1 at outfall 002. And all of them were due to polytrizol. Polytrizol is a water treatment chemical that's used for helping reduce the corrosion of copper in systems like cooling water systems. And I've explained this to you in previous years, because as you can see, we started having this issue back in 2018. And if you look at this graph, of the 29 excursions that we had over the past 4 years, 27 of them had to do with polytrizol. Now, the investigations into the causes of these exceedances and the corrective actions have been ongoing since the first time that we've detected this in 2018. The causes have not changed. However, due to COVID-19, they have certainly been exacerbated, especially with regards to the flow at the sewage treatment plant has been extremely low. And what I mean by that is that during this time, and you can see in 2020, we had the most amount of excursions, probably about 65 or more % of the flow going to the sewage treatment plant is operational cooling. And we have a lot of cooling towers on site that require treatment with polytrizol, as you can see here. And those towers have to be treated to reduce the corrosion of the copper systems. So the issue was just exacerbated in 2020. These are some of the corrective actions that we've taken in 2020. We had taken others prior, and we have been collaborating and working with DOE and the state on this the whole time. Some of the things that we've done is we started the pilot study using a chemical that does not contain TTA, and that is ongoing. Unfortunately, right now we're not done, but without the TTA, we are noticing that there is continual corrosion of the copper components. We do decrease the amount of TTA as much as possible for the systems. We try to use the least amount as possible, and we've done that over the past several years. We also continued the installation of automatic chemical control systems to make sure that there's no overdosing of the chemical to the systems. We've also initiated a bunch of hydrogen peroxide treatments to the targeted cooling towers to help alleviate Legionella issues, which that was part of the problem as well, because anytime we had a detection of Legionella, we had to drain the system probably before the TTA was used up and clean that system to make sure that there were no exposures of Legionella. So we, again, have been working with the state, and more recently, you can't see it on the graph here in 2021, but the last 5 months, we have met the limits. And the reason for that is because we had made a decision to stop using the chemical in all of our cooling towers. The main reason for that was because we just wanted to get a break while we're trying to get better solutions to resolve the issue. I think someone has their mic on still potentially. And also, we are right now in the process of procuring an environmental consulting firm to help us provide engineering services to evaluate this issue and other management alternatives, including the potential for having to do treatment if there are no other options for us. As far as not using the TTA, obviously that's not a long-term solution, but we felt it was important at this point while we try to do some additional looking into this issue. So as far as spills and reportable incidents, in 2020, we had 14 spills. As you can see from the graph here, the trend is positive. Some of it, I do believe, is related to COVID-19. We do have a lot. I mean, there still is a considerable amount of construction that's going on site, but even just not having a lot of folks driving, and year to year, we do have, contractor vehicles and personnel vehicles who release motor oil or ethylene glycol or antifreeze. And as you can see, one of the ones here was just that, from a contractor vehicle. But of the 14 spills in 2020, 4 of those spills did meet regulatory reporting criteria. 3 of those were less than 2 gallons. One of them had to do with a diesel fuel leak from a trailer mounted generator that was situated on a slope. And even though we have a policy not to fill the tanks all the way, mostly so that expansion of the fuel during hot days doesn't spill, also so that, I guess, if it's on an angle, it doesn't spill. But in this particular case, some did come out, and that was cleaned up right away. And of course, the generator was moved to a different spot that was on a more level ground. The other 2 were types that we typically see. We did have an antifreeze failed valve from a contractor vehicle that was cleaned up, and then also hydraulic fluid from a lawnmower. There was one release, I'll say that it wasn't really a release, and I'll explain what I mean by that, from a tank. It's 140 gallons of motor oil that was discovered in a secondary containment of a double wall tank that's located in our motor pool. Now, this tank has motor oil, fresh, clean motor oil that's used to fill and replace oil in the fleet. When the leak was first discovered, or when the oil was discovered in the secondary containment, we initially thought that maybe the primary tank failed and it went into the secondary containment, which is what it's designed to do. the regulations from the state says any release to secondary containment greater than 5 gallons needs to be reported. So we did that. When we removed the oil from the secondary containment and did some testing of the primary containment, we realized that the primary was not leaking. So the only other thing that could have possibly happened is that when the contractor came on site to fill the tank, they put the nozzle into the vent of where the secondary containment is instead of the fill location. That obviously shouldn't happen. So we changed our procedures immediately to make sure that that process was observed, and made sure that the contractor that comes on site does not do that again. So at the end of chapter 3, there's a table that captures other environmental events. This particular one actually has to do with a release that was included in the last slide. It was one of the 14 releases. However, it was not reportable to regulatory agencies, but we felt it was important to include in the site environmental report and, of course, present to you tonight. So on July 28th, an evaporative cooler that's on the roof of building 911, which is used for the AGS main magnet cooling, leaked approximately 100 gallons of treated water when a coupling failed. Now, this evaporative cooler automatically shut down from the water loss, and this is by design. All of the systems within the Collider Accelerator Department, regardless of the concentration of tritium or whether there's no tritium in it, are monitored in this way so that you can minimize the amount of water that's released. Because obviously it could do a lot of damage to other equipment and also want to minimize any release to the environment. Now, the last sample that was collected of water in the system was in August of 2019, and the tritium concentration was 29,900 picocurds per liter. As you know, the drinking water standard is 20,000 picocurds per liter. Now, when this release was discovered, and there was a lot of people that went and reported to this area and had discussions, the Environmental Protection Division and Radiological Controls and Collider Accelerated Department personnel evaluated the situation. When we were on the roof, and the photograph on the right here is not from that day, but we took a photograph for this presentation. But when they went up there, they thought that it's possible that some of the treated water may have reached a roof drain that's located nearby that leads to a stormwater outfall. And if you look at the photograph here, the roof drain is right here. The spill itself occurred in this area. It actually, initiated on a platform above. And I'll show you a photograph on the next slide. The evaporative coolers were on the platform above. And when the release occurred, the water went down through the grading onto the roof area where the rocks are. Of course, at the time when folks got up there, there was no obvious evidence that anything went down the drain. However, we made the conservative assumption that some might have. So after some discussions internally, BNL did conclude that any of the residual amount or concentration of tritium that would be observed at the outfall would not be a risk to personnel or impact the environment and was not reportable to regulatory agencies. Now, this was based on observations that were made that day and also on calculations that were completed and accounted for a continuous flow of clean water that is on the roof. You cannot see that in this photograph, but there's a pipe right here that discharges a continuous amount of water from the same system in a roof drain located in this upper level of the roof that ultimately connects to the same storm drain system that goes to outfall 002. So that combined with the overall total volume water that was typically measured at outfall 002, which we went back and looked at the past 10 years, and we do measure the flow at that location. It's a Speedy's permitted area that gets sampled. And as part of our environmental monitoring program, we also sample that for radionuclides. But the total amount of water there is about 200,000 gallons per day. So even though this was not a reportable to regulatory agencies, this event was reported internally, both the DOE and BSA, and determined to be a management concern. The reason it was a management concern is we just did not want to have the clamp that failed fixed and move on routine business. we wanted to make sure a team got together to do an investigation as to why this happened and how it could be prevented in the future. And that's what we did. So an investigation team was formed, and they performed fact-finding, a causal analysis, and also developed several corrective actions. Now, it just so happens that during the time of the investigation, a second very similar event occurred on September 10th, 2020, and it was a different evaporative cooler. There's 6 of them. We do believe that based on some of the actions of the investigation this photo obviously does not show any insulation, but all of these pipes here were covered with insulation, and they were being removed as part of the investigation to do inspections of some other clamps. And these are the clamp that I'm talking about. That's one of them, to see if they failed. And the thought was that some of that moving of the pipes and everything might have had another one fail. What we noticed the cause is that the fact that these were covered with insulation, and you can't do an inspection of those, even though these pipes are inspected on a daily basis. You can't see that might have been the cause of the second release. Regardless, that was incorporated and considered in the investigation and the causal analysis and the development of corrective actions. And the decision ultimately was to replace all of the couplings in the system. As you can see from this photograph, these are all brand new. Also, to insulate, we have to insulate the whole thing because we want to make sure that this doesn't freeze in the winter, which would cause another release, of course. And as you can see the photograph here of what that looked like after the fact. But the extra step that we took, which is very important, is to develop an inspection plan that involves random sampling of the couplings and the clamps going forward to make sure that over time that the clamps are not having the same exposure to moisture or corroding over time and can have a failure in the future. So we believe that these corrective actions will really go a long way in preventing this from happening in the future. So also in chapter 3, we talk about inspections on site. And as you know, we do get external inspections on an annual basis. In 2020, we certainly did have less of them because of COVID-19. However, we did have some, and they're summarized here. One such inspection that was initiated in 2020 was by EPA. And as I was reviewing this slide earlier, I realized that I didn't show all of what was inspected. They actually requested to do what they call an off-site compliance monitoring activity. And that was not just for RCRA compliance, but also underground storage compliance and Clean Air Act compliance. Now, in this request, they asked for a ton of data, many years of inspection records, photographs were taken, waste manifests were provided, and they actually spent several months looking at all of this data. So it wasn't until 2021 that we had a closeout meeting. And I'm very happy to report that there were no findings from this inspection. DEC also comes out annually to do an inspection on speedies. There were no issues identified during the surveillance. The county also comes out and does quarterly inspections at the sewage treatment plant for speedies compliance, an overall operation of the plant, and also a potable water system, an annual survey of our potable water system. So there were no issues identified at the sewage treatment plant from all the quarterly inspections that were completed. And annually, they always do find some small deficiencies. Typically, it's a light bulb that's out at a well house or pipes that might need some scraping and painting. And BNL is addressing those deficiencies as soon as we get the results back. But there were no major violations or deficiencies found from those inspections. Excuse me. So we're going to move over to chapter 4. So chapter 4 is all about air quality, both radiological and non-radiological. And this particular slide on radiological should be familiar to you. I haven't changed it much over the years. The radiological emissions monitoring done on site, it's still the same 3 facilities that are monitored on a routine basis. That's our BLIP facility, which we talked about earlier, and also Building 801 Target Processing Lab, which we talked about earlier. And then finally, the HFBR. So this is an example of the HFBR monitoring and the stack from the air that's still kind of monitored from inside the stack. And then this is the some of the monitoring equipment for the blip facility. And then this is an example of the air monitoring stations along the boundary. And we'll get to that in a second. As far as the total radionuclides released in 2020, it was 0.242 curies. Now, if you recall from previous years, that is a very low number compared to the past. And the main reason for that was blip did not produce any radioisotopes during 2020 due to year-long operational reviews and improvements. So that is why this amount of releases is much lower than we're used to seeing. As far as the ambient air monitoring, radiological air quality is monitored at 4 on-site locations around the site, and they monitor or pump air continuously, and we collect those filters on a monthly basis. And they're sampled for gross alpha and beta and also tritium. The results are reported in the SCR for gross alpha and beta. Those concentrations have been consistent with background, and the tritium concentrations are also less than typical minimal detection limits. On the non-rad side of the house, I wanted to share with you this new infographic that's in chapter 4. This is actually not the full infographic. It actually has a section on top that compares our levels with the federal levels in general. But the point that's being made is that they're very comparable. One of the things that we realized during COVID-19 is, or one of the benefits, I guess you could say, is that the amount of scope 3 greenhouse gases, which is really from air travel and commuting, are 2 examples, reduced significantly because of COVID-19. Obviously, because air travel stopped for the most part, except for mission critical, at least on site. And also, commuting reduced significantly because we had about 64% of folks who were not coming to the site on a daily basis. So you can see that we had a 66% drop in air travel, a 33% drop in commuting, which resulted in almost a 30% drop in the BNL scope 3 greenhouse gas emission. So this is an example of probably a positive outcome from COVID, if there are any. But I do believe going forward that, people are going to probably continue, not all of them, from working from home, and there will probably be less travel because they found that this remote way of these platforms that we've been using for the CAC actually work quite well. So I do imagine going forward that this will maybe not be as much of a reduction, but it will go down, or remain lower than it would have been post or pre-COVID. So we're going to jump into chapter 5, water quality, and we're going to do radiological monitoring and non-radiological monitoring. So we monitor not only the sewage treatment plant, we monitor the speedies permitted outfalls on site, and we also monitor the Peconic River. So tritium is typically less than the method detection limits in all sample locations. However, in 2020, there was tritium detected in one single sample at the sewage treatment plant in January that was at 3,020 picocuries per liter, which is below the 20,000 picocurie per liter drinking water standard. All of the months were less than the MDL, and that includes 2021. I obviously keep an eye on that, and there has not been detected since then. In all locations, no gamma emitting nuclides were attributed to BNL were detected for all the locations, natural products only. And on the Peconic River, there was no flow off-site in the Peconic River. There hasn't been flow off-site from the laboratory for at least 3 years now. We do occasionally get some flow on-site when there's heavy rainfall. And when we do get that, we try to go out and get samples. So I think in 2020, we were able to get out there 2 times. The results showed, as far as radiological values, strontium-90, gross alpha, gross beta, were all comparable to historical levels and can be attributed to, if there were detection, worldwide fallout or natural products. On the non-radiological side of the house, at the sewage treatment plant, full compliance, of course, except for the tolutriazole exceedances that I shared with you earlier. For the recharge basins, all the metals complied with respective water quality and groundwater discharge standards. We did have one detected detection of a VOC acetone above the MDL at the Central Steam Facility, a basin at 22 micrograms per liter. Now that was most likely due to an analytical laboratory contamination issue. We often find that acetone or detections of acetone and methylene chloride are from contamination issues at the laboratory. However, the groundwater effluent standard for acetone is 50, so we were still below that, and we have not seen that since that one detection at that location, and we have not seen that really mostly in the past as well. All the water quality analytes were within effluent standards. Now, the Peconic River, some of the metals exceeded ambient water quality standards. We see that year to year. We find that filtration of the samples showed that the source of the inorganics is mostly suspended sediment. Iron and aluminum are two examples that are above that standard occasionally, and that's attributed to natural sources. We have natural aluminum and iron in our groundwater and our soil here on Long Island. There were no VOCs detected above MDLs, and the water data for all of the river samples were consistent amongst each other and our control location, which is the Carmen's River.
I have to jump in and ask a question of clarity, Jason.
Yes.
I understand that you're saying that aluminum and iron are naturally occurring, but when you say filtration of samples showed sources to be suspended sediment, suspended sediment isn't a source, right? I mean, the contamination in the sediment is coming from a source.
Well,
I
yeah,
don't know. I guess I don't understand that sentence.
the suspended sediment. So when we collect a sample, there's a lot of, especially when you're collecting in the river, it's not a clean sample. So there's a lot of sediment suspended in there. Okay. And some of that suspended sediment. Yeah, I'll say that 5 times real quick. Is what we do a filtered and an unfiltered, and it is that suspended sediment. But again, examples of the natural, of the iron that could be part of that sediment, and also the aluminum is really what I'm trying to say.
Well, I guess what I'm asking then, was there, I mean, obviously the issue for the Peconic River was the mercury contamination. Were there other heavy metals that are not easily explained that are from natural sources?
No, those are the ones that are typical. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so normally I don't speak about natural and cultural resources. Tim Green does, but because of having so many topics to discuss, we decided that I would give a quick update. And the truth is, on the natural resource side of the house, there's really not that much report. COVID-19 definitely impacted those programs because, as you know, over the years, we've really been proud of the amount of interns and students that we've allowed to participate with some great research on the natural resource side of the house. But during COVID-19, we weren't able to do any of that. So we really can't share with any of the programs or projects that were done associated with that. We did have a deer management effort that we reported to you. There was a population reduction of 82 deer in 2020. And at the end of 2020, we estimated about 425 deer on site. Our prescribed fire program also remained on hold. Our turkey population has remained pretty consistent over the years in a range of 350 to 500 birds. We do have a lot of them on site, and of course, they're all hiding at this point of the time of the year. Actually, there's a lot of turkey, and they're quite large. We have some that are in the 20-pound range for sure. So, but they're lucky to be on this site because they won't be hunted. There is a key effort, the forest health monitoring in partnership with the Central Pine Barrens, which has been ongoing. They did continue to do some research off-site, but we really couldn't have anything done on-site. And we look forward to reporting more about the research and their findings in the coming years. As far as surveillance monitoring is concerned, the graph on the side on the right here is a little hard to see. I apologize, but what it shows is that the 10-year trend of cesium-137 in deer meat has declined considerably. The on-site average in meat was 0.06 picocuries per gram, which is a wet weight, with a 10-year on-site average of 0.59, which is this green line here, which you can see how much lower that is than the level up here, which is prior to us doing a lot of the cleanup on site. So there's been a lot of improvement over the year in this area. Now, we didn't do any fish monitoring in 2020 because there really wasn't any fish to monitor. As I mentioned, the river has been dry for a very long time, and when it is flowing on site, it really is not enough time for the fish to get to a size where you can collect a sample. We do continue to sample grassy vegetation and soil samples around the site, and those results have shown that they are consistent with past years. So no surprises as far as what we're seeing in the soil, and in most cases, it's all background. We do sample some areas biased where there was cleanup in the past, and we see that those concentrations have not changed or are decreasing over time due to half-life reductions. We also do see low-level mercury that continues to be detected when we collect rain samples, and the highest sample in 2020 was 8.37 nanograms per liter. On the cultural resource side of the house, we did have a contract to review early buildings and received several additional reports in 2020. And as part of that review that was done, they identified 19 additional buildings on site that were determined to be National Registered eligible. There's some photographs here of some of those facilities, Building 490, several buildings in the alternate gradient synchrotron complex, and also, believe it or not, the World War II era water tower. Now, these were determined to be eligible due to science, the architect and or architecture, or maybe the association with a Nobel Prize. Now, we are going, we've been working with the New York State Historic Preservation Office and DOE and continue our discussions going forward on how to make sure that we properly manage these facilities going forward. So that is something we actually have a tour, I believe it's set for next week, where the State Historic Preservation Office, some representatives are coming out to tour some of these facilities. So we're gonna report, how that went in the future. So this is my last slide, which is good because I am losing my voice. This is radiological dose assessment. So this slide, for those of you who have been, part of this group for a while and heard me, is very similar to what I've shown in the past. What we like to share as far as this is concerned is the ambient external dose that we report in the SER, and we get that from monitoring and sampling TLDs or thermolucent dosimeters. And this photograph here is an example of one of the sets that we have on site here. So at the end of the year, we go out and collect those TLDs on a quarterly basis. Our field sampling team does that, and they analyze those. And for the on-site TLDs, had a total dose of 64 millirem, and for the off-site, 61 millirem. Now, what we do is a statistical comparison of the average doses that were measured using the TLDs on-site and off-site. And for on-site, that's 50, and off-site 17. And we try to capture at least one TLD in every sector around the lab site at various distances away. And they're really kind of based on volunteers on site who are accepting of putting one of these TLDs at their house. I'm one of those folks that has a TLD in East Patchogue, and we have several other volunteers that place them around the perimeter of the site. So that statistical comparison between those 50 on-site and 17 off-site TLDs showed that there was no external dose contributions from BNL operations. So essentially, statistically, they're the same amount. As far as we also do a total effective dose to the maximally exposed off-site individual. So this was actually mentioned earlier in the presentation when EPA gave their presentation. So that dose in 2020 from inhalation and from ingestion pathways was 0.91 millirem. Now, the inhalation value here is very, very small. This is, again, very small compared to previous years because of blip operations not occurring in 2020. The ingestion is from a very conservative estimation of the same person eating 64 pounds of meat from a deer that was sampled on site in 2020, either from one of our deer management actions or from a deer that was hit by a vehicle. We take the highest concentration of cesium-137 that we found from the deer that were sampled, and we assume that that person also ate 64 pounds of that meat. We did not include fish this year because it's been several years since we actually had fish on site that we could actually even sample, let alone would be large enough for somebody to eat. So the ingestion pathway was really just from the deer meat. But as you can see from this value here, we are well below the regulatory limits that are shown on the slide. I also like to show this graphic, this pie chart, which is the average dose to an individual from the United States of 620 millirem per year. And these are the sources of radiation exposure. As you can see, they're really split in half, mostly by medical procedures that folks might get. Some, for example, that were explained in Dr. Cutler's presentation earlier, and then of course from background. But as you can see, this value, it's a 620 millirem compared to the value that we calculated. There obviously is a big difference, and this is a calculated average across the United States. So that is all I have. Of course, at this point, I do have one slide reminding everybody that next month, Bill Dorsch will give a presentation on groundwater protection. So we will now open it up to questions.
So Jason, that was an absolute tour de force. Just one of the most amazing presentations I think we've ever seen. And please take a drink of water and get ready. And if you need to type out your answers, we'll figure out a way to do that. Our first comment or question will go to Mark Israel, and then after Mark, we'll go to Dan McCormick. Mark?
Thank you. Actually, Jason, if you can go back to page 13, where you talk about the EPA, I think that had the EPA review. Yeah, you made mention here of how in-depth that review was and what they went through. And I'm trying to think back to the presentation that we had earlier today, like Conrad Sherman, and maybe I lost perspective, but the title on his slide was All-Inclusive Process Hot Cells at BNL 801. But is that because we're applying to do a certain type of research that we have to go through that EPA process? And does it overlap with a lot of the stuff that was looked at in this other EPA review that you reference here?
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you for the question, Mark. So yes, the presentation provided by Conrad is very specific. So you can imagine EPA oversees all environmental compliance. That's what they do, as far as that's their purpose. So there are a lot of separate different types of environmental compliance. That what he presented earlier was specific to the NESHAPS rule, and in this case, specifically related to radionuclide releases. So yes, his presentation is really all to do about an application that we are specifically in the process of preparing and submitting to EPA for approval related to the work that Dr. Cutler was talking about. And that's why we had her present first to kind of set the stage for EPA to give, for Conrad to give his presentation.
Okay, thank you.
This inspection that I talked about here is another set of EPA oversight that specifically looks at other areas of environmental compliance, RCRA compliance, underground storage compliance, and air compliance. And the air compliance was not radiological, it was non-radiological. They were looking at our emissions of non-radiological compliance, our Title V permit, and the releases that we have, for example, from our central steam facility.
Okay, thank you.
Jason, thanks. Conrad, I saw that you went live mic for a moment. Did you want to respond as well?
I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Okay, very good. Okay, next we'll go to Dan, and then from there to Al Krupski. Dan?
Thank you very much, Reed. Hi, Jason. Nice to speak with you again.
You too, Dan.
Question, can you kindly elaborate on the apartments you had said tested positive regarding contamination, where they're physically located, and what, if any, retesting procedures were conducted to determine the severity of that particular issue?
Sure. I'm sorry I don't have a figure to show exactly where the apartments are, but the contamination there was for lead. Okay, so EPA, there's a lead and copper rule, and again, that doesn't just apply to BNL, that's to any water purveyor in the entire country. So this is something that is not just for us. Everybody has to do this lead and copper rule sampling their systems for lead. The apartments are, so if you can recall from past presentations where we talked to you about our plans for Discovery Park, like when you come on site, there's an area on our site where we have a lot of buildings that were actually date back to World War II. And a lot of those facilities over the years were converted for housing. And admittedly, we know that those need to be replaced. And actually, from past presentations on Discovery Park, we talked about our efforts for getting rid of those old apartments and building something new. Unfortunately, one of the challenges we have with those types of apartments, and this is exactly why they have the lead and copper rule, is that back in the early days, they had lead service lines, or there might have been faucets that has lead in them, and they want to make sure that people are protected. And that's why we have to do that sampling, and we have to report the results to the regulatory agencies. And again, I mentioned that those exceedances were not violations, but we had to take action. And I had mentioned during the presentation that part of that action was resampling, which we had to do 6 months later. And we did that, and they were all below those action levels. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what it was for.
Thank you, Jason. Just a follow-up regarding the air monitoring section that you spoke to. I believe you had said you had 4 monitoring stations on the perimeter of the property. How do you determine where to place those monitoring stations?
So I wasn't involved in the original placement, but based on viewing windrows data over the years of where the prevailing winds go, and we do measure that. We've measured that for many years. Those stations were kind of biased and placed in those locations where we have, where the wind is going. And off the top of my head, I don't recall those directions, but there was some thought going into where those monitoring stations are on the boundary.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And folks, keep putting your hands up. I think if we work this well enough, we can reduce Jason to whisper. So I'll go next to Al Krupski and then to Reinhard Schumann. Al?
Thank you, Reed. Thank you, Jason. That was very informative. The question I have is about the sampling of the deer for cesium. Do you get any baseline sampling from, I don't mean surrounding areas like William Floyd Parkway. I mean like 20, 30 miles away type of sampling.
We have in the past, and I don't know if Tim Green is on tonight or not. He'll probably know better, but we have.
Yeah, Jason, I'm on.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
Let me turn my camera on. So yeah, we sample on-site at the laboratory, immediately offsite within a mile, and then as far as 5 miles away. And what we found over the years is that anything that's greater than a mile away from the laboratory is basically background. And anything within a mile and on site are about the same. And so we have a basis of comparison.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
I was going to say that anyway, but
All right, Al, does that take care of you?
Yes, thank you, Reed.
You betcha. Okay. Reinhardt, to you, sir.
Thank you. This maybe we'll give Jason a rest too, because it might be more for Dune to answer. But I was wondering, prompted by your slide about air travel and commuting, dropping our the carbon emissions from BNL, I was wondering if the lab, well, for example, is going to continue to have people work remotely to some level after COVID is gone, or so that the actual commuting might be reduced permanently. And I was wondering the same thing about air travel. Are there any noises about Department of Energy thinking about different ways to do meetings and doing some meetings virtually from now on, so people don't have to fly around the country as much? Just sort of curious.
Yes and yes. We are putting into place, the details haven't been fully announced, but a plan for remote workers. Those are people who will be essentially permanently off-site, though they have to be able to come back if we need to speak with them. Teleworkers, people who spend, say, up to 60% of their time off-site and then on-site. So we are going to have an alternative arrangement going forward. And I'm not aware of any plans, certainly not on-site nor with the DOE, that relate to air travel explicitly, but there's no doubt that the number of meetings, that meetings are going to have virtual components, and that a much greater number of them will be done virtually. The National Lab Directors Consortium, the group of 17 lab directors, has now for 18 months been meeting every other week, which didn't used to happen that often. And when it did, it was by phone. The virtual meetings are really fantastic. There will be a reduction in that, at least informally at that level.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Dune, very much. Okay, Al, I think I see your hand up again. If you intended that, then let's hear your next question.
That was just to add to Reinhardt's question about the virtual meetings, and certainly the same goes for the county and town and village levels. There's a lot of, in government, a lot of interest in maintaining the virtual meetings. Not only does it help with staff management of their time, but it certainly provides for greater public access also. So it's there's a lot of advantages there for a lot of different applications.
Thank you, Al, very much. All right, I don't see any other hands up right now, so I'll open up the floor in general. If someone has a comment or a question and hasn't been able to raise their virtual hand, please step in. Okay, very good. Hold on a second here. Excellent. So thank you. Jason, it was an excellent presentation. We're looking forward to hearing more next month from your team. I think to the CAC, great questions, really appreciate them. And now, Jason, you can drink some more water. Okay, I'm going to move on in our meeting now to the section where we do agenda setting. And I'd like to invite Amy Engel, who's the manager of environmental and community engagement at BNL, to talk to us about upcoming meetings. Amy?
Thank you, Reed. So I'm happy to report that John Shanklin will be giving us an update on COVID next month. Many of you were able to hear him in the spring, and we got a lot of compliments from how understandable he was able to make the topic, how he was able to field questions, and I thought that you might be interested in an update from him. That will be the science portion. Jason has already mentioned that Bill Dorsch from his team will be providing the groundwater update next month. So those are the two things on the agenda for November. And then in November, I'll have an update for things that we're considering in the spring. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Anybody have any questions or thoughts for Amy? Okay, just jump in if you do.
Looks like David does.
Yes, David, please.
David Sprinson.
Yeah, David.
Just to bring to remind people that the meeting in November will not be on a Thursday, but on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
Know that.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I can't make it because of the change, but people should know that that's the case. I assume it'll be available on tape and I will be able to look at it later afterwards since
Yes.
it's all being recorded.
Sir.
Thank you so much for the reminder. The reason that we had to do that is because the meeting fell on Veterans Day. And out of respect, we wanted to move it, and because the lab is closed that day. So we moved it to a day earlier. Thank you so much for bringing that up.
Yep. Very good, David. Thanks. Anything else from folks for Amy? All right. We have now reached the time in our meeting where we invite comment from the members of our audience. So if there's anything that anyone in the audience this evening would like to say to the CAC, please do so. Now's the time to come in. All righty. Thank you. Well, what a jam-packed evening we've had. Lots of great information, well presented, good Q&A, and we're going to end up a few minutes earlier than we thought we might, just because we've been so efficient with our time. So I'd like to thank you all very much for that, and reiterate that our next meeting will be on November 10th, 2021, which is the day before. It's a Wednesday. It's the day before our normal meeting. So everyone that can make it, please do. And David will make sure that you have access, as everyone else will, to the recording of that meeting. Does anyone have any final comments they'd like to make to the CAC? All right. Then at this time, we're going to vote on whether we should adjourn or continue on with our evening until breakfast. So all of you in favor of adjourning now, as opposed to having breakfast together virtually, please raise your hands. So it looks like we have a unanimous decision to adjourn now. So we will call ourselves adjourned at this point. And I thank you very much, and hope you have a great October. And we will see you in November. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Good night.
you. Having breakfast with you, Reed, was a great